Hey, it's your guy Tyrrell back with the interviews. In today's video, we're going to analyze how Mikel Arteta's left side created tactical issues for Leicester City in Arsenal's 4-2 win at the Emirates. So in today's video, first we're going to focus on how both sides look to press and break down their attacking and defensive shapes. Then we'll shift to Arsenal's left-hand side and analyze Granit Xhaka's role from that left shuttler position. And lastly, we'll shift on Leicester City's tactical shift in the second half. So when we break it all down and we do look at the board, we have Arsenal in a 4-3-3 and Leicester City in a 3-5-2 that looked more like a 3-5-1-1 with Maddison floating just in behind Vardy as a supply outlet. The first thing that we do notice with Leicester's shape is that they will have a 4v3 advantage in that midfield zone if Maddison drops off deeper in towards those central areas. That does benefit Leicester City from an attacking and defensive sense, because from a defensive sense, you expect them to drop off into a 5-3-2 out of possession, and from here they're able to ensure that they can occupy all of Arsenal's midfielders, and then have Ndidi sitting in front of the back five, ensuring that he can pick up Gabriel Jesus dropping off into those deeper zones, or Martinelli shifting laterally away from Castagna to receive the ball in that space. Because what you end up seeing is Maddison would drop off on Thomas Partey, you had Vardy dealing with Saliba, and that allowed Gabriel to push forward from a left center back role. And then in that midfield area, Tielemans and Dewsbury Hall were tasked with dealing with Xhaka and Odegaard. In that scenario, if you have Martinelli and Saka looking to push forward on the touchline, then Justin and Castagna would be tasked with their movement. But if you had Martinelli or Saka moving into more of a central area, then that would see Fofana and Amarte deal with that threat. As you could see, the same would apply for Odegaard and Xhaka if they pushed higher beyond Tielemans and Dewsbury Hall, and the central midfielders didn't look to track their movement. If Fofana and Amarte were free, they could simply pick them up. Ultimately, Leicester City were tasked with that luxury because White wasn't looking to push forward into advanced areas on a consistent basis, and if he did, they could still have 3v3 in that zone with Dewsbury Hall picking him up, or have Justin pick him up if Saka drifted into central areas, and then Dewsbury Hall could track the movement of Odegaard. And the same thing applied on that left-hand side because Zinchenko rarely pushed forward down the left touchline. We often saw him shift into that central midfield area, and it was more of a 3-2-5 with Xhaka either dropping in towards that inside left position or pushing forward to occupy space beyond Tielemans just ahead of Fofana. So in most scenarios, the wingbacks were capable of tracking the movement of the wide players, and then they were able to have that midfield cover in central areas. Meanwhile, when you look at it from an attacking standpoint, given the manner in which Arsenal looked to press, the 4v3 in that midfield area did cause Mikel Arteta's men problems. Because if Arsenal looked to press from the front, their front three would close down the Leicester City center backs, and then Odegaard would push high to deal with Ndidi. That does leave Justin and Castagna higher up the pitch, and that's where Zinchenko and White would look to push forward. But the issue that Arsenal encountered was that in that midfield area, if Odegaard stepping towards Ndidi, then you have 3v2 unless you have one of the center backs stepping towards Maddison. However, if Maddison drops off in towards deeper central areas, the center backs would be less inclined to follow him, as it would leave Vardy 1v1 against one center back. So what ended up happening here was that in the early stages, you ended up seeing Dewsbury Hall drop deeper in towards that midfield zone, and he was a spare man that was able to get on the ball and advance play in towards Arsenal's third. And then what ended up happening was that Thomas Partey would start to follow him into that area, but then that would allow space for Maddison to drop off deeper as well. If Xhaka looked to shift over to deal with Maddison, then that leaves Tielemans free in that central midfield area. The only manner in which Arsenal could combat this threat was by having the wide players tucking in to help out with that midfield overload, and then shift over to their man if the ball was shifted in towards that zone. Dewsbury Hall's freedom in that midfield zone was clinical, as he was making forward runs into space behind White, or he was looking to slide balls in towards Justin, who was consistently looking to make runs beyond White to penetrate that Arsenal backline. For instance, there were situations where you had Saka blocking off the passing lane in towards Dewsbury Hall when Amarte was on the ball, and that would ensure that he couldn't get on it. If they didn't have the wider players tucking in, they would at times have Thomas Partey pushing forward to close him down, and then from there you would have Saliba or Gabriel, depending on the positioning of Maddison or Vardy, dropping deeper to close him down tightly and try to win possession. When we shift back to Arsenal, the manner in which they were able to create chances largely stemmed down that left-hand side. Over on the right, we saw something similar to Crystal Palace, and White was tucking in a bit narrow, and then Odegaard was looking to receive the ball in wider areas on the outside of Dewsbury Hall. So that meant that Xhaka was now shifting laterally into space between Justin and Amarte to receive possession. And then if Xhaka was hugging the touchline, we didn't see enough of Odegaard drifting laterally to drag away his marker to create that passing lane for Xhaka. So he was often in the gap between Dewsbury Hall and Justin, or he was shifting out towards the wider area, so balls weren't being played out to Xhaka instantly. They were going to Odegaard first, and then that would force Xhaka to adjust his positioning. Whereas in the rest of that midfield zone, like I said, if Gabriel Jesus was dropping deeper, if Evans didn't want to stick tight, then Ndidi could shift over to deal with him as he was the spare man. And then if Gabriel Jesus looked to drift laterally, he was often in a gap between Evans and Fofana. When you look at that left-hand side, we did see the interchanging between Zinchenko and Xhaka, but for the most part, that initial movement didn't really threaten the Leicester City backline, because even if Martinelli drifted centrally, Fofana would pick him up, and then if Zinchenko moved into that central area position, Tielemans could step to him, and Castagna could deal with Xhaka if he was pushing forward. The real threat that Arsenal were carrying was that Tielemans wasn't tracking the movement of Xhaka when he was making forward runs, so there were scenarios where Xhaka was making forward runs in towards the final third beyond Castagna, but more importantly, he was making runs off Tielemans in towards dangerous areas in the final third and serving as a legitimate goal threat. So there were several occasions where Xhaka was making forward runs into advanced areas in the final third, and he was looking to get his teammates in towards legitimate goal scoring positions, or he himself was getting into these areas to test that Leicester City backline. And as you could see for the opening goal and the third goal, he was in the proper position to impact the game from those areas. In this example, you witness Xhaka on the ball in a 1v1 with the wingback and focus on Odegaard's movement. He makes the underlapping run in beyond the wingback, and you can see in the penalty area Gabriel Jesus is outnumbered. Odegaard makes that movement. Xhaka now has the space to deliver the ball in towards the penalty area, and he picks out the run of Xhaka at the back post beyond Tielemans, and he places it on his head from a tight angle, and from there Xhaka nods the ball off the post. In the build-up to Arsenal's opener, you see Gabriel Jesus holding off Evans and looking to play the ball beyond Castagna for Martinelli, and when Martinelli receives the ball in left half space, he holds off Fofana. What he does very well here is that he's able to retain possession and now focus on Xhaka. He's unmarked because Tielemans is ball watching, and he's able to make a run into left half space, and that's where Martinelli splits Fofana and Tielemans to find Xhaka in that zone, and he places Gabriel Jesus in a position where Evans doesn't want to get tight to concede a penalty, and it allows him to load up a shot on his right foot before Fofana can make a challenge, and that put Arsenal ahead. And then the other minor threats that we witnessed down that left-hand side was through scoop passes over the top. We witnessed Martinelli and Xhaka making runs beyond the back line to get into the half space. And if it wasn't the scoop pass over the top, it was simply quick combination play, dragging out markers, and playing quick 1-2s around them. It was often Martinelli involved, and he was able to combine with his teammates to get themselves into legitimate goal scoring positions. The final threat that Arsenal posed down that left-hand side, or in general in central areas, if they're able to get Gabriel Jesus in 1v1s against Evans, that he had the pace and the technical ability to bamboozle the center back, and from there he was able to get in towards the Leicester City penalty area to pose a threat. Ultimately, if we shift to Leicester, there were two areas that they were really causing Arsenal threats, and it both stemmed through attacking the fullbacks. Over on the left-hand side, they were looking to attack space in behind Zinchenko, and then have Vardy to make runs in between the center backs to drag out Gabriel. And over on the opposite flank, they were playing consistent long balls into the path of Justin, who was winning aerial duels against White and getting in behind the fullback, and that was a legitimate threat that Arsenal had to deal with. Ultimately, you could see it was a long ball in towards Justin that led to Leicester City's opener, and what ended up happening was that with Leicester chasing the game, Rodgers ended up shifting his system into more of a 4-3-1-2 with Maddison just in behind two strikers. Now you could see that they were playing a much narrow midfield diamond, and it was very congested in towards that central area, area, and then looking to push the fullbacks higher up the pitch to provide the width. This freed up a bit more space for Maddison to receive the ball on the outside or in towards the channels. And from there, you have two strikers that are now making runs in the gaps between the center backs and the fullbacks. And from there, Maddison was able to get on the ball a bit more, but his final ball often let him down when he got the ball in those areas. Whereas Gabriel and Saliba did a very good job of shifting out in towards the channels and halting any of the attacks led by the forwards. But even when you look to the build up to Leicester City's second goal, you could see that Maddison had a bit more space and freedom to make runs, and with two center forwards occupying the back line, it alleviated pressure for Maddison to get himself into areas that he couldn't pick up when they were playing in a 3-5-1-1. However, despite Leicester City finding openings in the Arsenal backline throughout this game, defensive mistakes in that second half rewarded Xhaka for his midfield runs into the final third, and Martinelli's work rate off ball and his ability to get himself into dangerous positions in the final third ahead of the Leicester City penalty area. So as you can see, while Arsenal's fullbacks were once again a targeted area for the opposition, the quick combination passes down the left side along with Xhaka's forward runs and clinical finishing at timely moments of adversity proved decisive in Mikel Arteta's men's perfect start to the Premier League season.